Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Dr. Edward Bush. Dr. Bush, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Thank you, Dr. Cross. Really appreciate you having me here today.
Man, it's a pleasure having you here with the great work that you're doing. Man, I can't wait to hear your voice and perspective on some of the things that we can do as we go forward. But before we get into the conversation today, Dr. Bush is the president of Cosumnes River College. He's there now for almost 10 years, and he has been a educator for 28 years. And that is really commendable when you hear the questions and concerns when it comes to Black men in education. So, it's great to have you in that space with your commitment to doing the work that matters. And also, he's the founder or the co-founder of Amend organization that focuses on empowering Black male students. So before we get into the
Yes, sir.
conversation, I want you
Mhm.
to share a little bit more about yourself so the listeners can get to know you a little
Yeah.
bit more as we get into this conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is important. I think particularly given the topic that we're discussing, and I think the overall thrust of your work is first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. Been married close now to 30 years, would be 30 years this April. Two powerful, wonderful children in their own right, who's about to turn 30 and 28 years old, respectively, a son and daughter. I think as Black men, the first job that we have, the most important job we have, is to be good husbands and good fathers. So, really, my work is an outgrowth of that particular role and responsibility that I have inside of my own household. I had the privilege of having strong parents. My parents were from the South, Mississippi. I had a engaged set of parents, an engaged father. Both of my parents were educators, so education was something that was instilled to me and my brother and my sisters very early. So it was quite natural, I think, for me to go into education, not just as a profession, but also as a calling. I saw this work as being an opportunity to improve outcomes and conditions for Black people. And particularly as my work involved from working, at the 4-year space into community colleges started in 1998. I really became more entrenched in dedicating my work, my time, and talents to serve Black people. Um, Oftentimes I view my work and responsibility in terms of paying back a debt. Like I am acutely aware, I think because of where my parents came from, is that folks sacrifice. They died, they lost their jobs, they were ostracized, oftentimes within their own communities to make it better for future generations. And the only way that I could think about repaying that debt, because I didn't get here on my own merits, I'm not any smarter than anyone else. I got here because someone paved the way. Someone did it first. And so the only way that I could repay them is by one, being excellent in what it is that I do. And two, for me to pay it forward to make sure that I'm creating a better situation for folks who look like me to come after and to be able to follow. So I really have situated that and centered that perspective in everything that I do, whether it's connected to the work I do as college president or the work that I do with the men. It all goes towards achieving that kind of common purpose and calling that I've been asked to do.
Man, and thanks for your commitment and just listening to you and the foundation that you came out of, with your parents being an educator. So you see firsthand the impact what an educator can have on young people. So
Absolutely.
man, I just listening to just your journey and hearing that you see it as a obligation, a calling to
Absolutely.
serve, to give back, to let others know, being that you know that you didn't get to where you are just because of how smart you are, but because of the foundation the people before you have, laid. So now, you see it as a responsibility to help others who sometimes may be overlooked to get the opportunity to become, all that they are capable of becoming. So
Absolutely.
again, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. But we're going to get into the conversation. We're going to talk about some things and have you share more of your perspective on how, we, especially as Black men, can make a difference in the world around us. So my first question to you today is, what is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
One, I think if we're going to make a positive impact, particularly for Black men, I think it starts with us understanding our cultural identity and our historical legacy. I think we have to ask the question, what does it mean to be a Black man? Secondly, what does it mean to be a Black man that lives in America? Because both of those questions intersect to point us to a direction, a set of work, a particular, as you asked, mindset. So to me, to be a Black man means that I have an additional responsibility to protect, to uplift, in fact, to cover our community, not from a purely kind of patriarchal standpoint, but I think Black men has been positioned within our community to play a particular role of protection, and not just physical protection, but protection of the psyche and spirit of Black folks, Black women, and Black children. And so, to me, the mindset that we have to have is being willing to be warriors for our people. And again, I want to reiterate that I don't mean that in a pure physical sense of the word, but that plays a part of it too. That we have to be in position to feel like we are accountable to uplift our communities, that when our communities are hurting, can we be the ones to come heal it? That when our communities need to be provided for, we need food, clothing, and shelter, that we have to feel the accountability to provide those things. When we talk about the spiritual care of our communities, that we have to view ourselves as the priest in our communities to be able to provide for the spiritual uplift of our communities. And I think we apply that particular mindset into the spaces and places in which we occupy. So I think regardless of our profession, regardless of our educational level, that Black men has a role, particular type of work. And I think go back to this idea of our cultural identity. I think being Black is rooted in our connection to what it means to be African.
Yeah.
That we understand that we come from a rich history, a rich tradition, that our first historical context does not begin with enslavement.
Yeah.
That we have thousands and thousands of years of Black culture, Black tradition, Black spirituality, a form of kind of Black ontology, way in which we be, the ways in which we show up, and that we are a continuation of that legacy. I think that's very important to fueling and to understanding the type of mindset that we have, because when we live in a country or in a space that constantly tells us what we're not,
correct,
and try to define us through another lens that is usually something that is pathological, meaning something is broken, or the fact that we're always the problem in the room that needs to be fixed, then we take on kind of this foreign identity and foreign concept and begin to fulfill like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we begin to act out contrary to our identity, contrary to who we are, and contrary to kind of the positionality that I mentioned, or the role that we're supposed to take in our community. So it's very important, and I appreciate that you said mindset, for us to understand who we are, for us to understand what it is that we are asked to do.
And just listening to you, and I realized the importance of how understanding cultural identity, and as you have gone through explaining, to understand that we are not what society may say we are, because sometimes we are limited, but sometimes we ourselves take on that limitations. And we have to understand that that's not who we are. And I like where you say that we are not we didn't start with slavery. We have
Mhm.
rich um, history
Correct.
for slavery, but sometimes that's what we are told, that's what we heard. And I like the point that you make that we sometimes think that we always need to be fixed
Hmm.
because that's the belief we take
Yeah.
on that we are not capable. And once we're able to break away from that, you find Black men start to thrive once they start to dismantle those labels and stereotypes. So it's important, as you mentioned, having that cultural identity, knowing who we are and why we are where we are and how to overcome some of the limitations that have been placed on us. So I really appreciate you sharing that because sometimes you hear the importance of understanding our cultural identity.
Absolutely.
You know,
I mean,
so
as black men, we've been able to survive at the highest level. I mean, despite all of the systems and structures of oppression that have existed, that has tried to come up against us, and we could name them all, right? Starting with enslavement to Jim Crow to right up to crack cocaine epidemic being placed in our communities, the attack that black male leaders had to go through when we do have black men that displays the courage to want to help free their people from Garvey to Malcolm to King. That list fortunately is long for us because
oh
we
yeah,
have a history of black men, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, again Elijah Muhammad. List goes on and on. Strong black men keep coming, and so I think it's important that we elevate that because sometimes I think we forget the stories of black men that have been able to survive at the highest level. For me, though, I want the conversation and our mindset to turn into how can we thrive? Because there's a certain trauma and impact, a psychosis that builds up within us for always being in survival mode. Always trying to make a way out of no way, to continue to have to be in a state of war, to always have to have your guard up. You grip the steering wheel tight when you see
oh
the
yeah.
police coming behind you. Like we're always in the mode to just try to make it, to just try to survive. And so for black men, I think the conversation is how can we thrive? And how can we create conditions for ourselves for us not to always have to be in fight mode? How do we build and create our own communities? And how do we open and build our own schools? Should we look at buying land and building communities back on the continent, or should we be bicontinental, not be limited to one space and one place in time? But for us to really begin to think about, how can we build for eternity? How can we build around freedom and sovereignty? How can we build in environments where we're not constantly under pressure
Correct.
instead of believing and always putting our energy in terms of how we can make it in the systems and structures that haven't been designed for our success?
Man, that is important. And as you talked about thriving, for us, at times, it seems like, we're always in that survival mood. We always trying to make it, trying to just make it to the next day
Yeah.
and to get
Next.
to that space where we can thrive. That makes it better for the next generation so they don't have to go through the same challenges that we experience today. And that's the mindset we have to have, especially as men. We have to take on that responsibility, as you mentioned, that additional responsibility to help break some of those cycles, to help build something that's going to last, not just this generation or 10 generations, but for generations to come. And once we develop that mindset and our young people start to see in us, oh man, we are taking on a different approach to
Absolutely.
creating opportunities. That's what they will start to believe. Because I strongly believe they will believe what they see. And the more they see us building and cultivating and creating something more sustainable, that's what they believe. Because, and I do think we do have, resources today more
Mhm.
than years ago. So it's just how
Absolutely.
we utilize the resources that we have as Black people, I think will make the difference in what we accomplish years to come. And I think now is a great time for us to really see that we have tremendous value and leverage
Absolutely.
it as we go forward.
And we have the models ahead of us. When you talk about resources absent a certain mindset
Yeah.
is useless. In some ways, it could be dangerous.
Yes.
So when we think about the fact, like in the early 1920s, no, Marcus Garvey, just for one of his industries,
Yeah.
raised $10 million in investment.
Yeah.
Just for one of his industry. I'm not counting the dollars he raised for the Black Star Liner. This was just for his manufacturing company, employed 1,100 people. He didn't raise that from outside of our community.
Yeah.
That was raised within our community. When you think about Bishop Henry McNeil Turner in South Carolina, like 3 years after our enslavement, raised $1 million to be able to build and to create a church that was coupled with a school. So we didn't have the same type of resources that we had then. But what we had is we understood that we didn't merely want to survive,
Correct.
that we wanted to prosper, that we wanted to live, and most importantly, that we wanted to be free. And so that was the goal, that was our aim, that was our destiny, right? To borrow language from Garvey himself. And because of that, because we thought about freedom, because we still imagine what freedom and sovereignty and independence look like, then with the resources that we have and the resources we didn't have, we pulled it together to be able to build something that we would struggle to do today in these times to raise that type of money, even though we are more heavily resourced now than we have ever been, at least in this country.
Correct.
And so that's why I think going back to your initial question around the mindset is so critical.
Yeah, it is. And those two examples, really show how creative and resourceful we are. And, that has become a part of our DNA. And it's just admirable, especially to see what Marcus Garvey did with what he had exposed to.
Right.
Because to raise $10 million back then, it's really commendable.
Absolutely.
So
it's mind-boggling to even to think about that. I mean, I think there's a lot of harm that has been created on the Black male psyche since enslavement here. And so it's hard for me to say what damage has been worse. But I think what has been one of the greatest impact on white supremacy on Black men is that it has limited our ability to imagine, that it has constrained our imagination. And so we are unable to picture something better for ourselves.
Man.
And when we picture that as better, it is so limited in comparison to who we are. So when you understand our potential, our possibility, the genius that lies inside of us, then you see about what it is we produce, and we tout these things as what it is that we produce as being major accomplishments, and they are. But in comparison to what it is we can do, is really not much. So I used to tell my kids, A is great. We're gonna make an A, but grades is only the system measurement of your excellence.
Right.
But I know what your excellence is. So we don't stop at an A. We stop with whether or not your understanding matches your own human potential.
Yeah.
And it may not be a grade to demonstrate that. So we have to come up with our own rubric to match our excellence, right? And so we have to come up with a new rubric about how Black men are to show up and what Black men can produce. I believe, like, within our imagination, right, there's nothing that we cannot do, because I believe the universe, the divine, would not give us the vision without also giving us the provision to make it happen. And I think the fear is for Black men to recapture their imagination, because whatever we dream, whatever we hope, I think it is that in which we are able to produce. So if we dream and imagine about freedom, Black men will be free. If we dream and imagine about opening up our own banks, rebuilding our own communities, then Black men would do that. If we dream about healthy children, right? Uh, where our women and our sisters are environments where they could be recognized, where they could be seen, where their gifts and talents and can be honored. That if we imagine a world for that, that we can help co-create that with Black women. I think there's no limits of what it is that we can do.
As you talk about the imagination of us and what we can do, and because we are so capable of doing great things, and it goes back to what you had shared earlier about whatever we create, it will help the next generation to see through us what is possible. Because if we start creating from that, believe in our imagination, believe what is possible, and start act on it, and we produce those things, then the next generation will produce it. And I also think that being that we expose to so many negative things in the media, that also affects our psyche, because that's what we're going to act on what we see, although it is scripted in a movie, but that's what we're going to believe because that's what they're showing us. That's what Black men do. So we have to change the narrative drastically if we're going to overcome some of the limitations that have been placed on us. And and I know you have kind of covered some part of my next question, but I'm still going to ask it. What advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
Yeah. One, I think it starts with oneself. I define manhood as your ability to master your own emotions and your own urges, right? Because when you're a child, only thing you are focused on is getting what it is that you think you want, or it is that what it is you think you need, and you act on those impulses. I think being a man is when you have control and mastery of those impulses, that you're able to exercise a certain level of responsibility and discipline. And so I think first we have to look internal and saying that I want to be someone of integrity, someone who own up to my mistakes, because we will make mistakes. Understand that this journey towards manhood and manhood divinity is a process. And some days you hit the mark and other days that you don't. But each day you don't, there's a responsibility to be able to own that. I think it's important for Black men to understand our commitment and responsibility to Black women. Understand that we cannot exist without them. And that when we try to exist outside of Black women, we're not whole. That there's something in us that is missing, that is not fully developed, that's not fully formed. And I think the absence of the connection to Black women open us up to get distracted in ways that you mentioned that would become much more easily influenced by these outside things and these outside entities that will have us not in, I think, our true and rightful positions. I think we take on the mantle of this idea and concepts that you often hear within the Black church, that Black men's role is to be priests, prophet, protectors, and providers in our homes, in our communities. So I think it's an opportunity for us to understand what each of those roles mean. Also, I think it's important for us to understand the power of our masculinity and not view masculinity as something that's being toxic. Like Black male presence is powerful. Come on, y'all know, like when Black men walk into space, it literally shakes the room.
Oh, yeah.
And if the room doesn't shake when you walk in, you have to check your own presence and your own self, that there's something uniquely powerful just based on our presence. So that means, to me, also leads to around Black men need to show up in places and spaces, that we got to show up to school board meetings when schools are not treating our children right, that we have to show up to churches, temples, and mosques when it's not truly serving and speaking to the conditions of our people. We have to show up to banks when banks are not lending to Black folks, because our presence is that powerful and it matters. And so I think our impact is far reaching, is worldwide. Yeah. That I really believe that the destiny of our planet the entire globe rests upon Black men, right, showing up and being present in those type of, in those type of ways. But ultimately, I believe it comes from deep self, constant self reflection to make a commitment to be better each and every single day and not settle for being mediocre at anything in anything that we do.
And man, that is so powerful, especially valuing our own presence, knowing that once we show up in spaces, people will look at us. And that is true. I've witnessed that so many times. Just show up in spaces and people start to look around,
Come on,
wonder who is this person?
right? Absolutely.
And it goes back to, as you shared, us valuing ourselves. Because once we value ourselves and once we show up in that mindset in spaces, yeah, it does command attention and respect. And we have to see the value in that presence, that type of presence. As you mentioned, that we need to show up in the meetings, we need to show up at the organizations, we need to show up in the communities, because once we are there, certain things will not happen. And as you
Yep.
mentioned, to be protective, be a protector for our women and the children. And once we are there, certain things will not happen
It
because
just
now
stops.
they're going to
Yep.
take us seriously.
Absolutely.
So once we are there to be that protection, things change. The way
Instant.
they look at us change. And I strongly believe that we should be pillars of our community, our individual community, our communities, the what ones we are attached to outside of the homes, because our value,
Mhm.
I strongly believe, is unlimited. Our potential
Absolutely.
is unlimited. What we can do is unlimited. So if we can see ourselves through that lens, things change.
Yeah. I agree. When Black men build out of our true essence, what we build lasts for eternity.
Uh, that is powerful, and it's I strongly believe that's what we need to get back to. That's the belief,
Mhm.
and that's the consciousness that we have to cultivate and develop within our young men, because we have been exposed to so many lies.
Mhm.
And even as adults, we are still sometimes struggle with that double consciousness because we show up in spaces and we wonder sometimes if, man, should I be here? Even
Mhm.
though I've worked my way to be here. But we have men today sometimes struggle because of what society have put in place. And that's sometimes
Absolutely.
because of us, because we know what we're dealing with.
Mhm.
So if it's not going how we want it to be, then we start to look through that lens and say, man, do they value me? Or should
Right.
I just say, as you say, we have to look within ourselves at times, say, it's not what they say, it's what I say. Although there will be barriers or resistance, because they will resist or we will experience resistance, especially once we show up as that strong person, that strong Black man in the spaces that we are, there will be resistance because
Absolutely.
one, they may want you to belittle yourself because
Mhm.
once you feel less than, you're going to operate from that perspective of being less than. So we have to
Yeah.
pay attention and be mindful of the environment that we're in and knowing that when it comes to, make a positive impact
Yeah.
or
Let me
a
let me
positive change.
let me, let me speak on that a little bit. I think one of the things that's important for us to be aware of is that we're gonna get resistance either way. Like for me, if I'm gonna go out, at least let me go out as a man,
That's right.
right? Because just your presence alone as Black men is often a threat. And there's a such thing as like dying 1,000 deaths versus dying one. And so when you try to operate and we show up less than who we are, be out of fear of what that resistance would look like. Fear losing our job, fear not being promoted, fear as being labeled as overly aggressive or intimidating. I mean, that list goes on and on. And so if we kind of police ourselves so much, and so we constantly lowering our voice and talk softly,
Yeah.
or we try to adopt a different way of saying things in different language, when we try to emulate, say for me, leaders that don't look like me in order to protect others people's comfort, for them to feel a little safer in my presence, that's a form of death.
Yeah.
Each and every time that I look to believe that I have to take on somebody else's consciousness. That's why I reject this idea of dual consciousness. I think is quite harmful,
Yeah.
actually, because it signals to Black men that only way to be successful, to be received, to be loved, to be cared for, to be accepted is to take on someone else's persona.
Yeah.
So what does that say about our indigenous persona? Right, that is not good enough. That if I act as myself, if I show up as who I am, that I'm not going to be loved, I'm not going to be respected, I'm not going to be promoted, I'm not going to be able to maintain my job. You can't ever feel safe and comfortable in my presence. And so I think that's why you see a lot of young men reject some of these quote unquote professional roles, or
Correct.
even reject schooling, right? Not education, reject schooling, because we send a message that you have to give up who you are and where you come from in order to quote unquote make it. And we reinforce that in our efforts to try to do good for our young people. You know, we say, hey, you got to talk one way here and be one way here, then be another way when you go there. You got to be, 10 times better. Don't dress this way, don't talk this way. And so, and folks are like, young people are like, nah, I'm not willing to give myself up. And
Correct.
I understand that mentality, right? And so I think part of it is that we have to make a commitment to be ourselves at all times, and knowing that when we are ourselves at all time, that everything else is going to work out one way or the other, and that we don't need to look for validation and acceptance outside of our communities. Like one of the things I learned, that even your enemies respect someone that operates with integrity.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 100%. They may not like you, but they have to respect you because
Absolutely.
you stand on what you stand on. You don't compromise your values to for someone to like you. And I like what you said about it's just a disservice to yourself and to those who came before you who fight for what we have right now. It's a disservice if we're going to come and pretend and be less than just because we want someone else to feel comfortable. You're not going to feel comfortable. I'm going to be who I am because if I act in a lesser of who I am, I'm sending that message to the young Black male that's looking up to me.
Yeah.
We cannot send that message that we're supposed to be less than, that we're supposed to conform, just because.
And
Uh,
that takes time, Dr. Cross. I mean, I don't want to pretend that that's easy, because when we have generations of conditioning
yeah,
to suggest that in order to survive, that we have to cow down and dim who we are, dim our masculinity, right? Starts when you have to walk across the street, when you see a white woman coming on the same side of the road, right? And so that type of generational trauma translates. You go on an elevator, you make sure if there's a white woman in there, you go to the other side, because we don't want to feel like we're encroaching on their space,
yeah,
and that we feel like we are a threat. That we don't walk so close behind somebody because we don't want them to think that we have negative intentions. So we slow down, even if we need to speed up, so
right,
we don't get close. And so these things are ingrained in us, and it's important for us to give voice to it. And if we don't give voice to it, we're unable to break that condition. I mean, it lives in me,
oh yeah,
right? Right. And so, as a young Black man, I remember my father and my mother, when we go in the store, be like, boy, they tell me and my brother, I said, don't touch anything in the store.
right,
Like when you go here, don't in addition, like don't ask for nothing when you get here, right? That's one thing, but don't touch anything. And they were so vigilant because they understood that if we touch something in a store, that there could be someone in that store that believed that we would steal. And so you see other kids, white boys, white girls touching any and everything. And I will remember, like, why is that the case? It's because they didn't have to live under that same tyranny,
Yeah.
that same threat. And so, in some ways, we are restricting and policing ourselves out of the trauma that is stunning our own development. And that is happening generation after generation after generation. And we don't speak about that. We don't unearth these experiences because we just say, hey, it's normalized. This is what it means to be Black in this country. And so we have to begin to say, look, even though that may be a reality to protect our safety, it's not right. Like, it's not right to tell our Black boys that no matter how crazy a police officer is, that we got to say, yes, sir, no, sir, and show them the ultimate respect, even in the time we're being disrespected. Now, we do that out of love and saying, we want you to return home. We don't want you to die. But again, there's 1,000 other ways to die other than a physical death. So it dies every time we have to dim ourselves, acquiesce, show up less than a man in order just to preserve our life. Without talking about what does that mean to the psychology of a 13-year-old Black boy, 15-year-old Black boy, 17-year-old Black boy, when you keep saying, no matter how they treat you, keep saying, yes, sir, no, sir. That's what it sounds like in my ears. Sound like in my ears the same thing we had to tell those who enslaved us and how we had to respond despite being treated less than human. No, sir. Yes, sir. And we perpetuating that. And we wonder why we're unable to take positions in leadership when we give all indication and clues that you're supposed to come through the back door and never go through the front.
Man, that is so powerful. And when you look at society today, we still experience that. We still
Absolutely.
seems to put ourselves in the back just because, man, that is so powerful. Because we have to break that cycle. And how we break it is, for strong men and women to keep standing up, to keep, voicing our opinions, and also when we're in spaces. I was thinking about this last night. When we're in spaces, it's not what I would say, like to say, I'm the only Black person here. That I don't think that's really something that we should be boasting about.
Mhm.
Because once we're there, our responsibility then, yes, we're going to do the work and be excellent at the work that we're doing. But now we have an opportunity, our obligation, to see how many of us we can bring in. Yes, we want to bring in the best that can do the work that is required. But I don't think that, we should just aspire to be, I'm the only one here. Because if we're going to break down some of these barriers, we got to break it down with numbers, with strength, with those who want to change that narrative of us have to be less than.
Mhm.
And that also will help to make it more available to those who are qualified, because some of those spaces that we're not getting into is because we don't have the voice there to
Yeah.
speak on our behalf. And if you show up and you display excellence, sometimes
Yeah.
you don't even get in if no one is there to speak on your behalf. Because what? Man, I'm threatened by that. Not they're not going to say it out loud, but
Right.
because you display excellence, you display courage, you display someone who is dedicated, you display integrity, you display discipline. Sometimes even before you get there, you don't even get the opportunity because your presence alone, as you were talking about, sends that threat. And that's why
Yeah.
when we're there, we need to be that voice, be the one to say, you know what, let me pull this person in because I know I'm going to need that support at some point as we go forward.
Yeah. A couple things as we wrap up. In direct response to that. Yeah, man, being able to make a way to create space and opportunities for folks to, get into places in which historically, Black men have been, underrepresented. Not to speak, in education, in roles of vice president, presidencies, but also you think of corporate America. All that plays a particular level of importance. So I think us being excellent, those who are in these positions, is important for us to do, I think, as well as possible, because it does create space for other Black men to follow, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But I think, man, in comparison to this larger conversation that we're having, that I think that shows up in ways that's really quite minor in comparison to what it is that how our conversation has been. So what I mean is, like, it's one thing to say, hey, we want to be able to get in spaces and places that we have currently and historically have been denied access to. But then when we talk about the imagination and the genius of Black men, the question is, man, how can we build and create our own spaces? Why are we working so hard to fit into systems, structures, and jobs that we know their goal is for us to compromise some aspects of who we are? And at the very least, the systems are going to be so constraining that is not going to be able to handle our genius, our imagination, our excellence. And at some point, that's going to create a tension. Either you're going to give up because you're tired of hitting your head against that wall, and you're going to settle for what it is that these systems and structures and jobs are just asking you to do. Are you going to get burnt out and discouraged, leave, or get dismissed because there's not an alignment between your work and what it is that you ultimately are able to do? And so the majority of conversations that we have around this with Black male excellence, you see that it really falls into, I would say, those type of spaces and places. I think there's very little conversations that is happening in these type of formats that speaks to what we talked about earlier. Like, man, we're not limited in any type of way. When we think about, the pyramids grew out of the imaginations of Black men, right? When we think about temples and colleges, right? That was Timbuktu's, Songhai. You could go. Empires was built out of the imagination of Black men, and so, man, it feels, what's the word? Insignificant then to talk about, how can I be in best position to get a job?
Right.
Yeah, right? I understand that reality. I understand the need. I understand our current context. But I think what I want to leave Black men who happen to tune in to our conversation, man, I want them to dream dreams again.
Correct.
I want them to imagine again. I want them to see their brilliance so big and so loud that they understand that there's no job and no space that's really good enough for them. That the only thing that is good enough for them is what they co-create with other Black people, or what they build out of our own hands. And so I know, like, it's hard for that to feel concrete. I know oftentimes we want, the 5 steps to do something, the 10 steps to get a job, the 5 steps to lose weight, the 5 steps to have a healthy family. Like, I understand the need to get real practical on some of this. But it's hard to get practical about something if we don't understand the larger underpinnings and philosophies of what it is that we need to do for our people. So I get it. All that makes sense. But man, there's so much more at stake, and there's so much more that we can do.
Oh yeah, man. We have the ability to create, and sometimes we limit ourselves because we're always looking for the opportunity out there, not knowing that we can create the opportunity for our community to thrive, for our people within the community to have an opportunity to make their own contribution. We don't always have to depend, as you mentioned, that we sometimes have to create our own table. Not to say we have to depend on someone else. But before we get to the end, what life lesson have you learned late that you believe is important for this current generation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually going back to my origin more lately to find answers to present and future problems that I'm looking to solve.
Hmm.
So my name is Edward Chapman Bush. I'm named after my great uncle. I mentioned both of my parents being from Mississippi. Edward Chapman Bush was basically a second father to my father, Lawson Bush the fourth, who's named after his father. My brother is Lawson Bush the fifth. His son is Lawson Bush the sixth.
Oh.
Edward Chapman Bush in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, all the way up to 1960s, in Columbus, Mississippi, owned his own hotel,
Wow.
his own laundromat, his own package store, his own pool hall, his own restaurant in the 1920s. And so this is causing me to rethink, what does progress actually look like?
Hmm.
And it caused me to question, are we really better off as Black men now versus then? And when we think about progress and being better off, I think we actually are talking about that we are making progress because we are getting more proximate to whiteness.
Hmm.
We get more accepted in the organizations that they develop. So meaning, if we could hit a certain position in a white company, that's progress. Or if we could eat and shop out a store that they own, that's progress. Or if we could get into a school that they control, regardless if there's curriculum or faculty or staff that looks like them, because now we could go to those schools that we was previously unable to, then that's progress. All that is based on us being more proximate to them. But it's not progress when we own our own stores, when we attend our own HBCUs that we build or created, that we're able to eat in the restaurant in which the owner is Black, that we're able to go to the Black doctor that is going to be able to care and have a greater understanding of the conditions in which we go to, that we're able to go to our own hospitals, but that's not progress. So to me, the full circle moment and what I've learned is that everything that I do, even if it's in small increments, I wanted to get closer to me owning and controlling the spaces, places, the institutions that I'm connected with. It's about sovereignty, liberation, and freedom. And that's what I'm on right now, based on the legacy, but also personally based on my own name. I feel like I'm called to do that.
Man, it just with the legacy of the Bush, and you break down with, especially in 1920, owning restaurant and laundromat, and that's a powerful question you ask about progress for us, because getting in spaces that we couldn't, a lot of us do think that's progress. But when you look back, especially you having that experience, having someone in your family who have done such a great thing back many years ago, almost 100 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
to see some of the struggles that we have today. And also when you mentioned about what Marcus Garvey did,
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that we have today? We know we have Robert Smith with his success, and
Yeah.
David Stewart with his success. But I strongly believe, man, we can have so many more
Absolutely.
success. But it goes back to the lens that we look through, or if we're operating out of fear of what we may lose if we try to build our community, because we have the resources to build our community. We have the resources to build our schools or to uplift the schools that are already serving the Black community. But sometimes that's not what's happening. We get donors from our own community at times, not giving the resources to the Black community, the schools or the Black businesses so they can thrive. Because again, what do we see progress as?
Absolutely.
That is really powerful.
Yeah. Man, no, it is. It is. And I hope folks
that's
who are listening finds it, equally as powerful. If anything, I want us to think and to rethink about what it is we deserve, to think about our possibility to be able to really recapture what it is that we had as a sign about what is possible for our future. So I appreciate the time. Thank you for reaching out and the
Oh yeah,
opportunity to
yeah,
be
no,
with you
yeah,
today.
no problem, Doc. But before you go, where can the listeners find you and support the work that you're doing? I know you have a conference coming up in
Yes,
2025. So please share where the listeners can connect with you and support the work
absolutely.
that you're doing.
Absolutely. I think the best place to kind of track the work that I'm connected to is go to the number two, MEND.net or .org. You will see the work that we are able to do to uplift young Black men through a men, how we supporting Black professionals in the educational space. You mentioned we have our annual conference coming up on the first Wednesday, starting with the first Wednesday in March, going through that Friday. You will see information about that on the website. Registration is open. Please do that. Also, track in 2026, we'll be doing our third All African Diaspora Educational Summit. We just finished our second conference in Ghana, Africa, this October, where we brought 350 educators to Ghana to learn and to see African Center education in practice. In 2026, we're going to go again. We go every 2 years, but registration is going to open up for that in the spring of next year. Space is going to be limited, so you want to track that. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn. Just put in my name. Follow me on Instagram and my social media to get up to date information about the work that we're doing, and also track the work that is happening at Cosumnes River College. I'm really proud of what it is that we've been able to do, the anti-racist stance we take as an institution, how we try to make the college more accessible and make sure that all of our students have equal opportunities to be successful. So you can follow the Cosumnes River College social media pages to get an update of how that work is rolling out. And again, thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Oh yeah, no problem. And thank you for sharing with us today. And I will definitely put ways to connect with you in the description. Um, so those who want to connect with you can as we go forward. So Dr. Bush, it's a pleasure,
Yes.
having you here
Right.
today. I hope the listeners have taken notes because I take notes myself, and you have shared some powerful insights and perspective on what we can do to make a difference as we go forward, and how important it is for us to use our imagination and dream big and go after things that sometimes are not the norm within our community. Listeners, thanks for being here on the Black Male Impact, is where positive changes are inspired. We're going to always bring guests that we believe will share information and perspective to help us as we continue on this journey to make a difference. Thanks again for being here, and please follow and support the work so we can make the difference that is needed in our community. Thank you.